right, we're going to start in a couple minutes. If you could take out your cell phones and turn them on silent or turn them off, I'd appreciate it. I'll introduce you. All right, I think we're getting pretty settled. Appreciate everybody being here tonight. My name is Jeff Patton. I'm the Vice President for the Central PA WWII Roundtable. Thank you for your patience as we get going tonight. We'd like to start the program as always. If you please rise, enable, and remove your caps and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag's over to my right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. We always appreciate our veterans, and we'd like to start by recognizing our World War II veterans. If you'd raise your hand or stand as able. I see two in the front right here. And any other veterans? That's a large portion of the room. Thank you for your service. And as always, we want to recognize family members and loved ones as well who support their service members. Fundraising efforts are, as always, we appreciate your support. A couple ways to do that. We have the book sales in the back in the foyer as you walked in. We also sell the coffee mugs. Those are $10. And at the end of the program, we'll have the authentic World War II helmets to collect donations as you leave the room after the program. Again, we want to thank the Hershey Community Gardens Foundation. As you noticed when you walked in, there's some flowers and vases out there. Those are free for you to take home and make and share joy with your loved ones. So we appreciate your support for being here again. Thank you very much. We do have one special announcement. And after many years, we're losing two of our great supporters. And so we want to recognize Cliff and Laura Pasuello. So if you please stand. And at least one of you has to come up here, if not both. Cliff, can I get you away from the board for a second? So Cliff and Laura, if you didn't know, have decided to relocate to the south. So they're moving, actually, they basically moved most of your stuff. And they're leaving Pennsylvania tomorrow morning. So this is their last evening in Pennsylvania, probably for a long time. Laura's been a part of the roundtable longer than most of us, I think back to Bill's time. And Cliff came and joined the board and has been a great supporter and obviously running the AV system. So we definitely couldn't have done this without you for all these years. We really appreciate it. And of course, we want to gift you a coffee mug. So when you're drinking your coffee,
tomorrow. I think ours are packed.
You can use them tomorrow, and we also have a card to give you guys as well. So
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your support. That also means that we are out in the lookout for some support. We are looking for another venue over the next couple months, so we might not be here in a few months. Make sure we'll post that and announce that. So we're looking at some alternative options. And we're also potentially looking for some AV support since he's driving out of town tomorrow morning. So we think we're good to go for the next month or two. But if anybody has suggestions on locations or support, that they know someone that can run an AV board or can help us, please come talk to one of our board members afterwards. We really appreciate your help. So back to the program for this day in World War II history. In 1942, Allied forces stopped the Axis attack in Egypt. And in 1944, British troops entered Antwerp, Belgium. And of course, everybody knows 2 days ago on the 2nd of September, 80 years ago, was the official end of World War II. Upcoming events, again, check out our Facebook page for more details. A couple things going on. First of all, the Harrisburg Civil War Roundtable is going to kick off their 67th campaign next Friday, September 12th, with a lecture by the popular historian Wayne Motz. He's going to return to his former job as CEO of the National Civil War Museum in Harrisburg this summer. He's going to speak on the critical role of thousands of regular troops in the U.S. Army played winning the Battle of Gettysburg. It will take place in Central Penn's College Conference Center in Enola at 7 p.m. And if you're looking for more information, contact Colonel Steve Smith. If you'd raise your hand on the far right there, you can talk to him after the program for any information on the Civil War Roundtable. On the 13th and 14th of September, so the day after that, Army Expo is happening at AHEC. There's also a book sale going on the 13th at AHEC, and they have some really good books. If you're into books, it's a good place to go. We'll have a table there, as well as many of our supporters will be there as well. So it's a great event, and it's free for everybody to go to, so I recommend you check that out. Also on the 13th, I mentioned this last month, but the SS John W. Brown Liberty Ship Cruise on the Chesapeake Bay is going to happen. So that's something you can look at. And then finally, actually second final, the following weekend, 19 to 21 September, is World War II weekend at the Eisenhower National Historic Site down in Gettysburg. And then finally, and I mentioned this last time as well, on the 1st of November, the 250th Marine Corps birthday is going to happen, and that's going to happen at the Penn Harris Hotel. And contact Larry Braxton. I don't think he's here tonight. You can ask me for questions on that, and I can get you in contact with Larry. Free for World War II veterans as DVs. For our upcoming roundtable speakers, on the 2nd of October, so next month, we're going to have Russell Baumgartner. He's a merchant marine, and again, that location will be here. So next month, the 2nd of October, business as usual, without Cliff and Laura, unfortunately. And TBD after that, so stay tuned. And now for our speaker introduction. So I'd like to invite our second president of our organization to introduce this organization's very founder and first president. So Mr. Kurt Gibson, if you could please come forward and introduce our speaker for the evening.
Hello. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kirk Gibson. I used to kind of be involved with the Roundtable. And for those of you who do know me, same thing. But tonight, I've been asked, and I'd like to say a few words about the gentleman who usually sits over there anonymously, appears to be scribbling things every day, every meeting and Roundtable. Often confused, perhaps, a clone of Benjamin Franklin. But it's Bill Jackson. But not to rob his thunder, I'm not going to say anything about military because that's his job tonight. But as to the Roundtable, he deserves a lot of recognition, and he'll probably tell you a little bit about it, but he and a friend conceived the Roundtable in 2003. That's a long time ago. Originally called the Capital Area World War II Roundtable, and after a few years of growth in popularity, where we had been meeting at a very crowded retirement community, thanks to Pasquello and another fellow, we ended up here. It's been great. It gives us a chance to expand. So with that, we've had this opportunity to, at times, have audiences of up to and over 300 people. Right here. We could never have done that before that without their help getting us here, so it's been quite a success. After 11 years of running this thing, Bill got a little tired of herding the cats, and there's a lot of that going on. So he stepped down, and I got drafted to take over for him. And I was kind of terrified at the thought, but after several years, it worked out very nicely, and I was very happy to do it. So, and that's why I say I recognize with you, a lot of you from those days. It's great to see you, and it's nice to be here. After several years, Charlie Lloyd, whom some of you may know, succeeded me, and now Chris succeeded him. But for 22 years, we've met monthly and have met and saluted nearly 250 speakers, most of whom were World War II veterans. Time was when we'd have 30 or 40 of them in our audience. Great people. They had wonderful stories and recollections of World War II. It was like being there. It was just very exciting, very nice. And now we have some great authors, historians, and educators. And that's all thanks to Bill's vision. I know that 23 years ago, it's exactly the way he envisioned it. Or not. Meanwhile, he was a busy bee. he was a journalist, as you may know. Most of them know him because of the Bee, I'm sorry, the, what do you call it? I can't hear you, but. Oh, yeah, right. What silly me. But beyond that, is coincidentally, oh yeah, the Hummelstown Sun, of course, which he owned and bought in 1970 and is still running today, so there's another success for Bill, although he's retired from there. But I knew Bill long before I moved here, not personally, but by reputation, because we share a common passion, and that happens to be antique automobiles and sports cars and things of that nature. He was editor and contributor to many journalistic endeavors with things, places like the Antique Automobile Club of America, which is here in Hershey, the Classic Car Club of America, the Veteran Motor Car Club of America, which is the oldest club of that sort, and the Society of Automotive Historians, which he also started as a founder. So being members of all those things, I've seen his name many times, and it's just such a pleasure to move here and meet the man behind the pen, and it's been fun ever since. Beyond that, he's founded and published many articles elsewhere, co-authored a wonderful book on the elegance of classic cars, the name of which still escapes me. Bill, what is your book's name? Rolling Sculpture. Imagine that. What a beautiful name for a car book. But he's been busy for a long time. He scribbles on every time at the meetings. So here he is, Bill Jackson. But wait, one thing I forgot to tell you. Bill shares something with Beyonce and Mitzi Gaynor. You know what that is, Bill? Today is their birthday, too. It's Bill's birthday. Would you join me in a little song? Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bill. Happy birthday to you.
Here it is. All yours.
Am I on? Am I on now? Yes, I'm on now. Thank you, Kurt. I was really scared because he does know me well. I didn't know what he was going to say. Well, before I start my talk, a little history on this organization. As Kurt mentioned, I'm one of the founders, but I am one of the two founders. The other one was a friend of mine, Jack Thomas. Jack Thomas was from an old Hershey family, and he was quite an amateur historian, and he put a lot of that into his daily life. He was manager of the Civil War and More bookstore over in Mechanicsburg. But we ran into each other at attending some Civil War events, and we'd go to Carlisle, we'd go to Harrisburg, we'd go to Gettysburg. And in 1998, we said, why don't we make them come to us? So in 1998, we started the Hershey Civil War Roundtable, which is still going. But about, oh gosh, maybe 2-3 years in, we had more people who were interested in World War II than were interested in the Civil War. So what the heck? I put out a press release through the Sun and said we were having an organizational meeting for the Central Pennsylvania World War II Roundtable. And we had a speaker for our first meeting. He was, I hope I've got this right, John Wright was one of my dad's Timberwolves, 104th Division guys. And we got a few people for that. But the second meeting, we had some guy named Dick Winters from Hershey that, as he said, he was mentioned in some book called Band of Brothers. And we really got a crowd. But with Dick and establishing our reputation, we were off and running. I could regale you all night with Dick Winter's story, because the way I met Dick Winters was in about 1976, 77, along in there. I was covering an event for the Sun, and this man walks up to me and taps me on the shoulder. And he said, "You're Bill Jackson from the Sun." I said, "Yes, that's right." He said, "I'm Dick Winters. I just moved into Elm Avenue from Fredericksburg, and I'm interested in what goes on in Hershey, and you know where all the bodies are buried." And he says, "We have to start having lunch together." And that was the beginning of a 25-year friendship. We bonded over my experience having a father and a stepfather, both as World War II vets. My father having fought and been killed in the same area where Dick's 506th Airborne had fought. Just one little story which will tell you what his personality. When the book came out in 1992, Dick sent me a copy. You know, "Dear Bill, I'm mentioned in this book." Well, mentioned. Anyway, of course, I was over at the house and thanked him and all that, but I guess it was almost a year later, there was something I wanted to refer to, and I went back and got it out, and I realized he hadn't signed it. He hadn't autographed it for me. So a couple days later, I was going over to the house, and I went out. Dick and I were sitting out in the kitchen. He had one of those log kitchen tables with a bench on either side. I'm sitting on one side. He's sitting on the other side, autographing a whole stack of paperback copies of Band of Brothers. And I said, "Dick, you know, you sent me this book when it first came out, but you didn't sign it. Would you sign it for me?" "Sure, give it to me." So I gave it to him. "Hey, this is first edition, first printing. This is worth a hell of a lot of money. I'll give you one of these paperbacks." That was Dick's personality. I'll cut it off right there and start to tell my story. I was born September 4th, 1934, Philadelphia General Hospital. My family lived in Springfield, Delaware County I'm trying to think of the street. I thought I had it. But anyway, my dad, William K. Jackson, and my mother, Mary Alice T. Jackson. Shelburne Road, got it. Anyway, we lived there till I was about 5. And in 1940, my father had a great job. He was Penn State 1928 mechanical engineering. He'd gone to work for Armco Steel in Philadelphia, American Rolling Mill Company. And by 1940, he was assistant to the president. But he got an offer he couldn't refuse from his father-in-law, Howard J. Thompson of Curwensville, Pennsylvania, Center or Clearfield County. He owned Mid-State Theaters, a chain of 15 motion picture theaters, and he offered my dad the general managership because he wanted to retire from it. So in 1940, we moved to Clearfield, Pennsylvania. And my father, as I said, was Penn State in 1928. I was not aware of it until I got into the family papers after my mom passed away, but I found his certificate of completion of ROTC in 1926. ROTC was around even back then. And anyway, he was very conscious of military activities and following the war in Europe. And very shortly after we got to Clearfield, he started going around to the service clubs, Rotary, Kiwanis, those kind of them, and speaking out against Charles Lindbergh and his America First group in New York City, who were saying it's Europe's war, we don't want to get involved in that. And my dad, as many knowledgeable people knew, we were going to be in it eventually, whether we wanted to or not. And he went around speaking to that effect, that we needed to help Great Britain and France and Belgium and Holland and all of those countries because we were eventually going to be in it. Well, when the war started, December 7th, 1941, I have a very clear memory of that day. I was playing in the backyard, and my father came out and said, "You come inside." And I went in, and he took me into the living room, and there were my visiting Jackson grandparents, my grandmother and grandfather, and my mother were gathered around one of those great big old Magnavox floor radios. And they were listening to the reports coming in from Hawaii on the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And he said, "Listen to this, boy, this is history." So I have a clear memory of the day that the war started. Well, shortly after the war started, they started the local home front activities. The civil defense started. My dad became an air raid warden. I can remember him going out at night to be sure everybody had their lights turned out, or they had their blackout curtains. Do you remember that term? You could get blackout curtains, and he would be checking on that. When the National War Loan Program started, he became active in Clearfield. And, you know, that's, I don't know how many of you remember, I'm sure a number of you do. You bought a war bond for $18.75, and at the end of the war, you got $25 back. I remember it because we bought war bonds in school. We were issued a little book, and we could buy a 25-cent stamp every week and paste it into that little booklet, and when we got $18.75 worth, we again were issued a war bond. I think from second grade to probably sixth grade, I had 3 war bonds. But my dad, what he did, the Mid-State Theater chain was 15 motion picture theaters. And at the Lyric Theater in Clearfield, where we lived, he would go in on a Saturday night between the first and second show. They would turn up the lights, and he and other local Clearfield war loan people would go on stage and sell war bonds. And he encouraged the managers of the other 14 theaters in the theater chain to do the same, and made arrangements for the war loan people in each of those communities to be contacted to go and do that. I have one very vivid memory of that. I was not allowed to go to the second show on a Saturday night. But one Saturday, he said, "I want you to come tonight and stay for the second show." So I did. And when the first show was over, they turned up the lights, and my dad and another man went up on the stage, and they're selling war bonds. And all of a sudden, from the rear of the theater, there's this shrill whistle blown, and a bunch of German soldiers come in and start screaming, "The Fuhrer does not allow this!" And they rush up on the stage, and they arrest my father and the other man. And about that time, 6 American soldiers come out from the side of the stage and arrest the Germans. I'm sitting in the back of the theater about wetting my pants, as you can imagine. And what this was, after we went into North Africa in November of 1942, somebody in this National War Loan National Organization got the idea of creating this acting troupe that would go around the country to different venues and put on this little show. And anyway, as we owned the theater, and the Lyric Theater was an old opera house. It had dressing rooms downstairs. So after the show, my dad took me down to the dressing room to meet these guys, and I can remember going down there and holding German uniform with bullet holes in it, and holding a German rifle, and anyway, at some point, one of them come over holding an Afrika Korps helmet and plopped it on my head and says, "This is yours, kid. It's too small for any of us." That's it, sitting on the corner of the table up there. I've kept it all my life. But he continued to that. I say he started out with Clearfield, and then he became Clearfield County Chairman for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Whirlwind Drives. And he did that up until about, I think it was June 1944. He was given the Minuteman Award for what he accomplished, and I have that up there. Those of you who know the Revolutionary War, the Minuteman statue that's in Concord. Well, the National Whirlwind Drive people had created that, made up smaller version of that statue as an award for people who really did a good job in the Warlord program. But sometime along about, April, May of 44, word came back to my father, why isn't Bill Jackson in the Army? Well, number one, he was 36 years old, married with me, and was active in all these activities. But as soon as that came back to him, he went down the next day and enlisted. They tried to talk him out of it, even at the enlistment point in Clearfield. They tried to talk him out of doing it. But he said, no, I'm not going to carry that around with me for the rest of my life. So he went into the Army. He was sent to Camp Croft, South Carolina. It's very near to Spartansburg. And he went through basic training down there. Came home for about 2 weeks. And I remember we kids, we didn't play cowboys and Indians during World War II. We played war. And where we lived in West Market Street, it ended at what was called Coal Hill. There was an abandoned coal mine, abandoned shaft coal mine up the hill. And we would go up there and dig foxholes and throw coal clinker hand grenades at each other and plan battles. And anyway, when my father came home on leave, I remember I took him up to show him what we did and show him my foxhole. And I remember one of the last things he told me was, "Son, always dig your foxhole deep." And I've carried that with me all my life. But anyway, as I say, he went to Camp Croft, South Carolina. And after basic training, and he was home for his 2 weeks and went back for advanced training, towards the end of that period, Mom and I went down for 2 weeks to visit him. And he could get out, not every night, but several nights, and especially over the 2 weekends we were there. And I was allowed to go out to the barracks. Well, you talk about a kid having a good time. I would go to his barracks. They would put me in a night jacket, put a steel pot on my head, hand me an M1 rifle, and I would march around that barracks. I thought I was king, you know what. And I've never forgotten that. The other thing we did one Saturday, he got permission and we ran the obstacle course. And I remember one of the fellows who was with us, they were dressed up in their khakis, their summer uniforms. And anyway, one of them fell in the stream while we were running the obstacle course. The one guy I forgot to mention, when the war first started and the draft came in, they were not drafting one or two, they were drafting, maybe 5 or 10 out of a town. And in Clearfield, the American Legion had made arrangements, and they would have a little ceremony in front of the courthouse, the county courthouse, and the men were left by train, and they would march to the train with the band, with the American Legion band. And one of the first ones to go, I went over to watch them, and was a young man by the name of Johnny Mariani. And Johnny was the produce clerk in the market where Mom did her shopping. And when I would go shopping with her, he would slip me a carrot or a stalk of celery. And when I knew Johnny was going, I went over, and when he walked to the train, I walked beside him holding his hand. And after his basic training, he went into artillery. And he sent me one of his khaki overseas caps with the red artillery bands on it. That is on the table. That has stayed with me all my life. You begin to get an idea how World War II affected me. But anyway, when he finished his training, he came home for a last leave, and in, I believe it was roughly November of '44, he went overseas, landed in France, went to what they called a Reppel-Deppel, which was a replacement depot. And he was assigned to the 104th Infantry Division, to I want to get it right, 413th Infantry Regiment, Company A. And he joined the 104th near Aachen, Germany. He missed their fighting through Belgium and Holland. But they then fought all the way to the Ruhr River, and they were supposed to go right across the Ruhr River. This was in December, but they were stopped by the Germans having their last offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. But they were on the north rim of the bulge that held. But their plans to cross the Ruhr River and take the town of Düren, Germany, were held up by that. So they sat there from December of 44 until February 23rd, 1945, when they finally got the clearance to start what they called Operation Grenade. And they brought in a bunch of boats that had a trained man operating it, standing or sitting up in the back to have control the speed and the rudder. And the bad part about it was that the Germans knew they were eventually going to be coming, and they'd had 2 months to prepare their defenses on the east bank of the Ruhr River. So when they jumped off at 3 o'clock on the morning of February 23rd, my dad was in one of the boats in the first wave. They got shot up. They hit the guy who was guiding the boat. It went whirling down the river, went over a 17-foot dam, and he was MIA. We got a letter from the Army informing us. And then roughly 2 weeks later, we got another letter. His body had turned up in the river, and he was KIA. He was buried in Henry, Henry, Henry Chappelle Cemetery in Belgium, where a lot of the guys from that Battle of the Bulge fighting, and also the 104th Timberwolves and their fighting, were buried. Mom and I were given the option. We could either have brought his body home or left him permanently at Henry Chappelle. And we chose to leave him in Henry Chappelle with the guys he fought and died with. And I was going to cover it later, but I don't want to run too long. But when I went over to Germany in 1958, one of my buddies, I had told the story of my father, and one of them told my company commander, you have PFC William Jackson in his outfit, and his father, William Jackson, is buried at Henry Chappelle Cemetery in Belgium. They called Stars and Stripes, the Army newspaper. And just before Memorial Day, 1958, they sent me and a photographer up to Henry Chappelle Cemetery and took a picture of PFC William Jackson at the grave of PFC William Jackson. And that was the front page photo and story on the European edition Stars and Stripes on Memorial Day, 1958. And I can't find my copy. I've got copies of the pictures. They gave me pictures, and I think they're showing them. But anyway, that pretty well completes my father's story at that point in time. It picked up later on. But back home in Clearfield, we had the different wartime activities, the war bonds I mentioned. We had the scrap drive. I used to take my American Flyer wagon around the neighborhood and collect scrap. Save the scrap, beat the Jap. That was the slogan. And I would get aluminum. One of the things that they taught us to do, I took my can opener with me, and we would get cans, and you were to cut both ends out, slip them inside, and squash the can, and turn them in that way. But we would get newspapers, magazines, fat, just almost any kind of metal you can think of. I love to encourage these ladies to give me old pots and pans because they were good metal. But I did that. We also collected scrap at school, and we built a pile of scrap in the backyard of the school in the playground area that almost stretched up to the second floor of the school. The other thing we had was junior aircraft spotters. I can remember myself and one of my buddies, we would ride our bicycles up to the Forest Service Fire Tower where the real aircraft spotters were. And they would quiz us. They had these little cards that had a front, side, and rear view of these planes. And they would flip these cards, and we had to be able to identify what they were. Japanese or German or Italian. And I still have some of those, but I couldn't. I was going to bring those tonight, but I couldn't find them. But those were the kind of activities that we had during that time. Well, when the war ended, things started to get back to normal. I remember my mother's friends were very protective of her. She was a good-looking lady and had inherited some money from her father. And anyway, her main social activity revolved around the Clearfield-Kerwinsville Country Club. And I can remember, we went up there not every Sunday for dinner, but I'd say at least 2 Sundays a month. And her friends were, like I say, were very protective. I can remember one in particular, Doris Albert. He was the Buick car dealer in Clearfield, had been a good friend of my father. And there was one ne'er-do-well guy that was hustling my mom, hoping to talk her into marrying him, and they just kind of quietly told him to just find something else to do. But along came this tall, good-looking Texan who was a golfer. And he was at the country club and would be having meals there. And he was the sales representative for Sharp and Dome Pharmaceuticals for Central Pennsylvania, introducing new products to the doctors. And he centered out of Clearfield. And being a golfer, about the only place to go was the Clearfield-Kerwinsville Country Club. And he met my mom. And he finally got the approval. And along about October of 1946, he came to me and asked my permission to marry my mother. And of course I was delighted because I'd gotten to know him. I used to go along and caddy for him when he was doing a golf round. But his name was Bradford B. Crunk, C-R-U-N-K, and he had quite a story in himself. He was a World War II veteran. He grew up on a ranch in Texas, but he always wanted to be a doctor. And of course, there was no help from home. So he enlisted, or he enrolled at Texas University in Austin in pre-med. And he worked his way through. He literally ran the Trailways bus station office in Austin, Texas, for 4 years at night and drove a bus all summer. Graduated in 1939. He knew he couldn't do that for medical school. So in 1939, I'll sign up and do a 3-year hitch in the Army and save my money and then go to medical school. Well, you all know what happened. December 7th, 41 came along. So by then, he's a regular Army sergeant. Well, here's a regular Army sergeant with a pre-med degree. So they pulled him out, sent him to OCS, and then sent him to Carlisle, Pennsylvania. The reason they sent him to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, Carlisle was the East Coast Induction Center for doctors and other medical personnel going into the Army Medical Corps. So he became a basic training cadre officer. Started out as a second lieutenant platoon leader. And he was there from, oh gosh, I guess it was either late 42 or early 43 on. He kept putting in for overseas duty, but they wouldn't let him go because apparently he did a pretty good job. I mean, doctors, those medical personnel, they had to take basic training like anybody else. They had to learn to march, they had to learn to shoot a rifle, they had to learn, survival in combat like anybody else. And that's what he did from when he went in there until the end, well, just before the end of the war. They finally let him go in August of 45, and he was sitting in San Francisco waiting to join the troops going in to take the main islands of Japan when the war ended. But he knew, or not a lot because I didn't know that much about it, but I thought he was still young enough to go to medical school, but he thought he was too old. So what he did, because of his contacts that he had developed, with like Sharp and Dome Pharmaceutical, during the training at Carlisle Barracks, which he incidentally he gave basic training to 52 classes. And anyway, that's when he got the job with Sharp and Dome Pharmaceutical, and ended up in Clearfield, and ended up being the greatest stepfather anybody ever had. He was a better stepfather than most of my friends' real dads. And I remember when he adopted me, he showed me the legal documents, through Clearfield County where he adopted me. And he sat me down and he said, "You are my son, but you will always carry your father's name to honor him." That's the kind of guy he was. So that covers pretty much the story of my father and my stepfather. But the other story I wanted to tell you, most of us kids had a hero, a World War II hero. And mine was Colonel Ashley Woolridge from Clearfield. Now our neighborhood, West Market Street in Clearfield, was about 3 blocks long, and most of the families were younger, like my parents, but there was one older family, the H.R. Woolridge family, and they had 2 sons. They had Ashley was the oldest son, and Richard was the younger son. Richard joined the Army, ended up in the Corps of Engineers, and went to Burma and helped build the Lido Road going into China to offer supplies. Ash finished his degree at Lock Haven State Teachers College, but at the same time, he also got a pilot's license. And then he enlisted in the Army Air Corps. Well, here's a guy with a pilot's license already. So as soon as he finished basic training, he was off to flight school. And apparently he excelled to a point where Jimmy Doolittle took notice of him. And one of the combat planes they were developing was the B-26 Marauder, twin-engine bomber built by the Martin Company. And apparently it was a tough plane to fly. As a matter of fact, they had Jimmy Doolittle going around to bases around the country giving primers on how to handle this plane. Well, Ashley apparently was pretty darn good at it. And after we went into North Africa in November of 42, it was early in 1943 that after they had captured a German air base, Ashley Woolridge went over there as a colonel. He had the fastest promotion from second lieutenant to bird colonel in the Army Air Corps in World War II. He had the record. But he commanded the 319th Bomb Group in the 12th Air Force, flying first out of North Africa over the Mediterranean, bombing Italy. Then after the Italians surrendered, he moved to an Italian air base in Foggia, Italy, and flew out of Italy into bombing Romania. Well, then before D-Day, his squadron was called back to England, and he flew out of England bombing German installations in France. And then after D-Day, when the forces had moved in and had captured a German air base in France, he moved over to France and flew out of France against Germany. The reason I know all this is twice he came home on leave. And each time he came home on leave, he picked one night at his parents' home, invited all us neighborhood kids in. And he showed us bombing pictures. And Army Air Corps equipment, pieces of German airplanes, and the one I remember holding in my hand. His plane got hit over a target by a German 88 aircraft shell, anti-aircraft shell. And it hit right in the nose. If those of you can picture the B-26, well, I think if Cliff's got the pictures up, you can see it. Because one of the pictures is him getting congratulated on his 50 missions. But anyway, he had this piece of shrapnel. It had blown the nose off their B-26, killed the bombardier, and severely wounded the pilot and knocked him out. And when he woke up, they were still flying in a straight line at well over 200 miles an hour with no nose. In other words, with the wind coming right in. And he was still in his seat holding a piece of shrapnel from that 88 shell. And that was one of the things he showed us. So he had quite a career. But the end of it, while he was billeted in France, he apparently was billeted in a castle that was occupied by the widow of a French general who was killed in North Africa. And something must have developed, because at the end of the war, and I remember this because I met her, I saw her, the Countess came over to Clearfield and begged Ashley, I mean, he was Hollywood good looking, begged him to go back to France with her and live a life of luxury. But he turned her down and married his high school sweetheart. So that was that story. And what has made it stay with me, his son had very little interest in his father's record. And he gave me his dad's 50 Mission Crusher hat. For those of you who don't know what a 50 Mission Crusher hat is, you can take a look at Ash's right up here. They took the officer's cap and took the spring steel band out that kept it out so that they could fold it down for earphones. So there is Colonel Ashley Woolridge's 50 Mission, they called it their 50 Mission Crusher. There is Colonel Woolridge's 50 Mission Crusher with a pair of earphones that his nephew Jack got for me. And that sits in my office staring at me every day. But that's again one of my prized possessions. So that pretty well brings things up to where I went in the Army in 1957. How we doing time-wise? I'll try and make this quick because there was a little... Keep going. Okay. One of the things we did, my stepfather's father in 1948 was still running 100 head of Herefords on a 1,000-acre ranch and planting cotton and sorghum and farming with a pair of mules. He didn't have a tractor. And it was really getting rough for him. So the 1,100-acre cattle ranch close to his father's came up for sale, and I became a farm boy. We moved to Texas in 1948. And I went to a little country high school in the town of Nixon, like the president. The only thing famous about Nixon came a number of years later. There's a signpost outside of town that says Nixon 1, Kennedy 35, Johnson City 64 on one signpost. But as I say, I went to this little country high school. The only major was vocational agriculture, because just about all of us were going either back on the farm or in some kind of an agricultural related occupation. But I wanted to go back to Penn State and then major in engineering like my father. Well, they finally, after my junior year, they realized to get into Penn State, you needed 2 years of language and 2 years of science, and my little country high school had no language and only one science course. So they pulled me out and they sent me to Valley Forge Military Academy in Wayne, Pennsylvania. And I went in as a junior in 1951-52. And incidentally, that's my cap. My Valley Forge cap is down there with some of my insignia on it. One of the things that I did that was kind of got me started in my journalism career, the English teacher took a liking to me and liked my writing style, and he encouraged me to try out for the school newspaper, the Legionnaire, which I did, and lo and behold, I was named sports editor. Well, one of the most interesting things that happened to me then, and of course I didn't realize it until years later, we shared an office with the yearbook staff, you know, the annual book put out by that graduating class. And in particular, I shared an office with the editor. I was a first-year cadet, a plebe, lower than anything, and he was a cadet captain. So our initial relationship till we got to know each other was yes sir, no sir, yes sir. But after we got to know each other and liked each other, one night we were working alone. He got up, went over, quietly closed the door, came back and sat down facing me. And he said, "In here, it's Bill and Norm. Out there we play the game." You may have heard of him. His name was H. Norman Schwarzkopf, Commanding General of Desert Storm. And you know, we were friends, not close friends, but we did keep in touch over the years. We both had black Labrador retrievers, and when he was after Desert Storm, the Academy gave him our Bob Hope Award, which was the highest alumni award that the Academy had. And he made sure Rosemary and I were invited back for the event, and also invited to the reception. And I remember that we had a receiving line, and as Norm and his wife came through, everybody was saying, "Hello, General Schwarzkopf. General Schwarzkopf, we're so glad to see you." You know, he got to me. I figured, what the hell? I said, "Hi, Norm." And he looks and says, "Bill." And the people around me said, sir, are you a general officer?" And I said, "No, I was a PFC in the infantry." But he was a great guy. It was a great friendship. But the other thing, after I went in the Army, and again cut me off when I'm getting too long, with my graduating from Valley Forge Military Academy, I got to admit it, I went to Penn State in engineering, flunked out, and got drafted into the 1st Infantry Division at Fort Riley, Kansas. That was in 1957. And I went through basic training, and with my experience from Valley Forge, it wasn't easy, but I already knew how to play the game. And I ended up being named outstanding trainee of the 1st Infantry Division for the year of 1957. And this is some Cold War stuff that I'm sure you've never heard of anything like it. When I got back after our leave from basic training, before we went into advanced infantry training, my company commander called me in. He hands me a Master Sergeant armband. And he says, put that on. He says, you are assistant platoon leader for the 1st platoon. You are responsible for 44 men. And I was assistant because he had assigned to there, supposedly as my boss, was a sergeant first class who had come in out of the reserves, had never served a day of active duty in his life, and had never gone through basic training. In short, he didn't know anything except how to be a son of a bitch. And he was slowly destroying the morale of our platoon, because I had a good platoon and we were doing well. I taught him, we did all the regular stuff, but I taught him things like I taught him the Queen Anne Manual of Arms that I'd learned at Valley Forge. And I taught him fancy drill. I'd march him up and down the company street, 1st squad of the rear march, 2nd squad of the rear march. I'd have the whole platoon scattered up and down the company street and then put them back together and do all kinds of trick maneuvers. But this Sergeant First Class was just driving me crazy. And I went to the company commander and I said, is there anything we can do to get rid of this guy? And he said, yes, there is. He says, you can have a petition signed by every man in the platoon and take it to the Inspector General, and they'll have him removed. So I called a meeting of the platoon, and I explained it to them, and everybody agreed to sign except 6 black guys. We were the newly integrated Army. And I had a black corporal, regular Army black corporal, one of my squad leaders, and I asked, I said, what's going on? He said, we had old World War II barracks, and if you remember, the NCOs had a little private area at the end of the hall. He says, you be up in my room tonight at 6 o'clock, and you explain what it is you want to do. So I went up at 6 o'clock and I went in, and there was the 6 guys and the corporal. And one of them is sitting at a desk, and I knew him. He's Jimmy Sutphin, a nice guy. I'd known him and worked with him. And I explained it to Jimmy, and he then turned around to the other 5 guys and said, yes, we'll sign it. Jimmy Sutphin was a graduate of Grambling, and they respected the education more than the rank. So they all signed the petition, and we got rid of him, and we ended up being honor platoon at graduation. Well, one of the interesting things that happened, we went on December maneuvers. We were supposed to be out for 3 days. And what they called a blue norther blew in, with the temperature dropped to about 20 degrees above, and with the wind blowing. So they canceled the operation, but they couldn't get the trucks out to pick us up till the next morning. So the company commander says, you platoon leaders, take care of your men. Well, most of them built a gigantic bonfire, and they were cooking their front and freezing their butt, or vice versa. I took my guys down in a dry stream bed, and we dug fire pits into the banks of the stream. And with the wind, I had them put their pup tents up 2 pegs high instead of 3 pegs high, and put dirt around so they wouldn't blow away, dirt around the edges of them. and fill them full of buffalo grass for insulation, and then get out their sleeping bags, and then I went around to make sure they took their boots off before they climbed in their sleeping bags. Well, the first sergeant came along and looked around and says, what is all this non-reg stuff, Jackson? You put those tents up properly, put out those fires. And yes, Sergeant. And as soon as he left, I told the guys, I said, forget it. Just leave things the way they are. Well, the next morning, the regimental commander comes around. We'd had 11% frostbite in the regiment. And they came down into my dry stream bed, and my guys are all there, gathered around the fires and the fire pits they'd built in the side of the banks of this creek. And he sees the tents set up 2 pegs high. And he asks, he says, who's in charge here? And the first sergeant says, he is. So the colonel comes over to me and says, Sergeant, what is all, where did you learn to do all this? I'm standing at attention. I said, Boy Scout Troop 7, Clearfield, Pennsylvania, sir. And he just grinned and says, carry on, Sergeant. And as they went away, the first sergeant, but those were my basic training experiences. I went over then to Germany. I was assigned to the 8th Infantry Regiment of the 8th Division, stationed in Mainz-Gonsenheim, which was right on the Ruhr River. And anyway, with my record, I ended up as company guide, what they call a pathfinder today. And our mission was to protect the Fulda Gap. They figured if the Russians and the East Germans came across, they would come up through the Fulda Gap, which the Germans had done in World War II, or where they fought through in World War II. But anyway, we had pre-planned positions up near the East German border, and I used to run patrols up through there, and we even got close enough. The East Germans and the Russians had built guard towers, and I even got close enough one time to wave at them. But fortunately, nothing ever happened. We had maneuvers, and we would go up and assume our positions, and we were told that we were to dig in and hold for 2 hours if the balloon, as we said, if the balloon ever went up. But fortunately, it didn't. And anyway, as company guide, we had a live fire exercise at a place called Weilflicken, which is where Hitler trained his SS troops. And we had a live fire exercise in company size. And as I said, I was the company guide. So the range officer came to me, and he gave me full tracer ammunition. And he says, Private Jackson, I want you to go down that hill, cross that little creek, start up that hill, and when I blow my whistle one time, you start directing fire. There was a World War II German pillbox on top of the hill. And he says, you hit the ground and start directing fire up there. And they said, the company is going to fire in advance by platoon, and when they get up to you, you fall in and go up to the top of the hill. Well, I go down the hill, cross the creek, start up the hill. He blows his whistle. I hit the ground. I start firing my tracer ammunition, and all hell breaks loose over my head. And they come down and they cross the creek, and they start up. And all of a sudden, I hear a BAR being fired at me. And turns out what had happened is the BAR man was doing everything right. He was holding it into his side and watching his area of fire ahead of him, but he stepped in a rabbit hole and destroyed his knee, and then went down in pain and locked on the trigger, and he had it pointed at me. I rolled over in the snow, and they were coming at me, jung, 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 BAR on slow fire, and he put the clip through it 10 feet away from me. I knew I needed a desk job. So my best buddy that had gone all through basic and advanced training with me was a clerk in the headquarters. And he got me a job as, what the heck did they call it? Anyway, I was the guy that was responsible for writing hometown news releases, with some journalism background. Johnny Jones is stationed in Mainz, Germany, driving a 2.5-ton truck, that sort of thing, and sending it to our local newspapers. Well, we had a lot of sports teams, and I started writing stories about our sports teams for the 8th Division newspaper, The Arrow. And about 3 months later, I get a call from a Major Grady, who's the editor of the Arrow at division headquarters. And he says, Private Jackson, he said, I like what you've been doing with those sports stories, and I just lost my sports editor. He gyroed home. Would you be interested in that job? No, I don't want that job. General's mess, no KP, no guard duty, weekend pass every weekend. Oh, I don't want that job. So I became sports editor of the 8th Infantry Division newspaper, and that's where my journalism career really began in earnest. But I did that, and he encouraged me. I told him I'd flunked out. He asked me what I was going to do after got out of the Army, and I said, I don't know. I flunked out of Penn State. And he said, we have University of Maryland courses right here on base. I'll bet if you took a couple of them and got good grades, they'd let you back in. And that's exactly what happened. I went back, finished my bachelor's in business management, married this cute little Irish girl from Wilkes-Barre, and we went back for our master's degrees. And then, I ended up, my first job as editor of the Union County Journal in Lewisburg. And, I liked that, but the guy who owned it didn't get reelected to the legislature, so he didn't need me anymore. And I put a resume out and ended up as editor of the Corning Glass Company newspaper in Corning, New York, their company paper. Was very unhappy there, and was sitting there wondering how I'm going to get out of here when my old thesis advisor on my journalism master's called and said, I've been named director of broadcasting for the university with a mission of putting an educational television station on the air. Would you come back and head up my publications and public relations department? So I went back to Penn State, and I'm one of the 5 founders of WPSX TV. It's called WPSU now. But I stayed there for about 4 years, and then worked for about a year for an ad agency at State College. And then, as my good friend over here said, I became editor of Antique Automobile magazine, and eventually came to Hershey with it in 1968. And being careful, rented a house for 2 years. But a year and a half later, I'm riding around with the real estate guy, looking at lots and looking at houses. And I said to him, I can't understand a town growing like Hershey doesn't have its own weekly newspaper. And he turned around with a startled look on his face and said, how'd you know? And I thought, that's no great revelation. I said, how'd I know what? He said, how'd you know the Hummelstown Sun's for sale? So that's how it happened. In June 1970, took a deep breath, went into the old Farmers Bank and Trust and borrowed $100,01970 and bought the paper. And the reason they needed so much money, they were still doing the old hot metal type and could get out no more than 6 pages a week. So I had to buy all offset printing equipment to convert it over. And, you know, that's what we did for the next 37 years, and we both still write for it. I was covering the Lower Dauphin School Board for 54 years, up until I had my fall last October. But I still do a weekly column, and I help Rosemary with hers. She still, mine's called From Where I Sit, and hers is Kitchen Cupboard. So that kind of brings you right up to date. And I don't know if anybody's got any questions. I'd be happy to answer them. If not, thank you.
Question right over here.
I thought that you might cover it, but tell us a story about one of your roommates up at Penn State. I think you know who I'm talking about.
I'm sorry?
One of your roommates at Penn State became quite well known in the entertainment field.
Oh, yeah, I forgot that. When I went into the journalism school, there were 3 of us were vets. One was a Marine, and myself and another fellow were Army. And the fellow who was a Marine was going to school on a GI Bill with a wife and 2 kids. And, you know, he didn't have any money. And Rosemary and I were graduate assistants. Our tuition was paid, and we were even paid $70 a month. So a big Saturday night, we'd buy a pizza and a 6-pack and go out. They had a trailer in Park Forest Village Trailer Park. And we would, you know, spend an evening with them. And that went on, not every weekend, but we became very good friends. You may have heard of him. His name is Donald P. Belisario, Belisarius Productions, Magnum PI, NCIS, and so a few other programs. But what happened, he always wanted to go, I mean, even then he talked about TV when we were in grad school. But he finally, I mean, when he graduated, he was hired by the Centre Daily Times and State College in their advertising department, but he was so good he was almost immediately hired away by Lancaster newspapers, and no more than 2 years later he was hired away as vice president of a Dallas, Texas advertising agency. But he still wanted to go into TV, and he didn't quite know how to handle it. But anyway, what he finally did, he divorced Marge, gave her everything, and got a cheap secondhand car and drove to California. And one of his Marine buddies was a technical consultant on Baa Black Sheep. You remember that one? And anyway, he got a job there, and he apparently wrote the proposal on Magnum PI and got a couple of backers, and the rest is history. You know, he just has that touch. I mean, NCIS is still one of the top-rated shows, and they're, you know, reruns on the Magnum PI and even the first Magnum PI with Tom Selleck. But I guess it's been about about 4 or 5 years ago. He gave Penn State $30 million and created the Donald P. Belisario College of Communications and invited Rosemary and I up for the ceremony. And he hadn't changed at all. Everybody's coats and ties, all very formal. And Don had made arrangements. It was a private room where he and Rosemary and I got together before the ceremonies. And he's just in a black leather jacket with a baseball cap. And that was Don. He just, you know, a very informal guy, but he has so much talent, you know. And now his son David is picking up. He's doing some of the new NCIS shows. But I got to admit, we haven't kept in touch since that presentation at Penn State. But I think he's probably in semi-retirement now because he's a little younger than I am. But you know, I don't know how much work he's doing anymore. But that was another one of those crazy occurrences. So, anybody else? No?
One more over here.
Oh, okay.
It's loaded.
Yeah, my hearing aids are crappy.
Okay, Bill, can you relate a little bit when you were stationed in Germany? How did you end up getting into the Henry Chappell Cemetery? And I guess you knew beforehand your father was there, but what was the situation that led up to you visiting your father's grave site the first time?
Oh, well, the first time I visited was when I was in the Army. I thought I told that story, where my company commander found out I was PFC William Jackson, and he was the same name.
Were you stationed close by?
Well, no, I was, like I said, I was in Mainz, Germany, and he was buried in Belgium, but the Stars and Stripes sent me up there with a photographer to take the pictures at the grave. And I had copies. Those are, I think if they probably showed them. But the end of the story, I see they've got the pictures there. How many kids in World War II, you know, when we were kids, it was things. It was a battleship. It was an M4 Sherman tank. It was objects that kind of caught our attention. And I was crazy about a Jeep. Well, Colonel Woolridge and his brother Dick, when the war ended, they came home and they went into strip mining business in Clearfield County. And, you know, there weren't a lot of off-road vehicles at the time, so they went to an Army auction in Philadelphia and bought two 1945 model MB Willys Army Jeeps and brought them back to Clearfield, and they used them on the coal strippings for about 10 years till they wore them out. And they gave them all to Dick's son, Jack, and he took the best of the both of them and restored the one. And I won't say I always wanted a Jeep, but I always admired the World War II Jeep. And anyway, I was up to Clearfield one Memorial Day, and a friend of mine says, "Hey, you've got to go down to the Grace Antique Car Museum. They've got a restored World War II Jeep in there." So I went down to the museum, and I go in, and they showed the picture of the front view. There we go. And I look at the front bumper, and that's where they had the identification. And there's 12 AF 319 BG HQ1, which stood for 12th Air Force, 319th Bomb Group, Headquarters #1. It's the Colonel's Jeep. It's Colonel Ash Woolridge's Jeep. It took me 5 years to talk his nephew into selling it to me. But I finally got it and brought it down to Hummelstown. And that was the car that carried the speaker to the Hummelstown ceremony after the Memorial Day parade every year for 10 years. I finally had to let it go. It's still in the Harrisburg area. Any of you know Jay Gift has quite a car collection. And he goes to some of our military roundtables. But anyway, I had the Jeep, I had the Colonel's Jeep. And there I am loading it up to go somewhere. Anybody else?
Quick, Bill, we talked a lot on the phone the last few weeks about your preparations and everything, and you told me a story one day about you also, during the war, as a boy and your family, you planted a victory garden. Maybe you could remark about that. And
yeah, I forgot to mention that. Some of the things, and a few of those artifacts are up here. You know, I mentioned about us having the war bonds, and that we kids could buy a war bond in school by buying a 25-cent stamp every week. And I told you about going around collecting scrap. But one of the other things, you know, there was rationing. I mean, big time rationing. And everybody had a ration book. I mean, I had a ration book even as a kid. And everything had points on it. You know, meat, clothing, shoes, just about everything that you would want to buy had a point value to it, and you could only buy it if you had the proper number of points. Well, the way we offset that was we planted victory gardens. And I know our house on West Market Street in Clearfield, we had a nice big backyard. And this was before my dad went in the Army. We had a farmer come in and plowed it up, and we planted it. And one of the things I remember is the corn, looking at the corn higher than me in my backyard in a residential neighborhood. But we had corn and tomatoes and, you know, any number of veggies, because veggies were one of the hardest things to get during the war, because they were all, you know, being used by the military service. But that was another one of my childhood experiences, because my job was keeping it weeded. I had to get rid of the weeds. But that's that story.
real quick, I wonder if Bill, if you have any other. You talked about some of your photos in the background. If there's any other photos, I know you had about 12 or so tonight. Anything else you want to remark on? Any other photos that you want to tell us a brief description about what they are, or who's pictured in the photos? From the ones that Ricky had for us.
No, well, a couple of the photos that they ran through. I had one of my father's basic training class at Camp Croft, South Carolina, and then my stepfather. I had a picture. One of the other pictures that was shown, was number one of them was him as a captain, but one of them as a young lieutenant with one of the companies that he put through basic training. One of the doctor companies at Carlisle Barracks. That was that. The one other thing I could tell you that was when I went into the 1st Infantry Division, when I was drafted into the 1st Infantry Division, they took $5 out of our first month's pay, and we did become members of the Society of the 1st Division. And they had reunions every year, and they had a newspaper. And after I got out of the Army, I got to thinking, I wonder if the 104th Division had something like that, my dad's unit. So I looked and I found the National Timberwolf Association. And I started going to their reunions. And that was really cool. I met his platoon leader, Lieutenant Peter Bratton, who was all happened to be the head, also was the head historian for the 104th Division. I met Art Decker, his company commander, who told me, yeah, they made your dad the platoon runner. We'd love to have him back at company headquarters. He was the best damn bridge player in the company. And anyway, the one that really got me is I'm at dinner at one of the reunions, and the fellow next to me leaned over and says, Bill, I spent the night in the foxhole with your dad the night before he was killed. He was a great guy. Wow. But anyway, in 1990 at the reunion, the president of the alumni of the National Timberwolf Association gets up and says, we have a major problem. The man who has edited our newspaper since 1946 has developed Alzheimer's, and we need a new editor. For the next 20 years, from 1990 till 2010, I was editor of the Timberwolf Howl, a couple copies of it up here on the table, the twice-a-year newspaper that we put out through the National Timberwolf Association. I did it out of the sun while we were there, and the only thing I charged him for was my printing costs. But the other thing that we did, or I did, when I first took over as editor, I had a 12-page paper, and I started getting memoirs from these guys. You know, it'd be 4 or 5 pages, or even 10 or more pages of their memories of World War II, what they did, where they were, who they fought with. And I went to the board and I said, can you let me add 4 pages to the Timberwolf Howl, and I'll request the guys to send in their war stories, I called them. And I did it, and they started to flow. And I did that, and for the 20 years that I had the paper. And the result, it was done right after I left. There was a gal who was a daughter, like me, was a PhD history professor in California. She gathered them all up and published a book, or I should say, this is the National Timberwolf Association published a book called Timberwolf War Stories. It's over 400 pages long, and we saved the stories of the Timberwolves from World War II. I'm so proud of that, and the gal and I did not get along, and anyway, I'm not even mentioned in the book. But that's all right, we got the stories done. So, I guess that's about it, Chris.
I think, Kirk, you have a question? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. But do you have none you have right now? Oh, yeah, sure, definitely.
God, I love him, Mike. Bill, thank you for sharing such great memories of your time during World War II, particularly in your youth. Those of us, a few of us in this room, remember some of those days, the rationing, the blackouts, all that. I grew up next to a naval air station, and there's a lot of activity going on, and just listening to you tonight brought back so many memories. It's nice to have them. Thank you very much for doing that, and thank you for everything. That's all.
Thank you. Well, I have one, I'm a car guy, and the one neat thing that happened to me while I was over in Germany, I bought and brought home with me a 1935 BMW Roadster. I restored it while I was in Germany, and the German fellow I bought it from was also a German race photographer. I ended up carrying his camera bags to a lot of the races. But at one point he said to me, Bill, would you like to run that car in the Le Mans retrospective? And you car guys know what the Le Mans 24-hour race is. Well, the day before the 24-hour race, They have a 1-hour race for cars that raced at Le Mans prior to World War II, 1939 and before. And he says, I can get you an entry if you want it. Well, I still had my racing license. That's another whole world I could tell you about. I still had my racing license from before I went in the Army. And so with the international racing license, which you had to have to race at Le Mans. So Private Jackson goes to his company commander and says, sir, I have the opportunity. Everybody knew my car on the base. I said, I have an opportunity to run the BMW in the Le Mans retrospective race. He says, Jackson, that's above my pay grade. You're going to have to go see the colonel. So I go up to 8th Infantry Regiment headquarters into the colonel's office. And same thing I asked him. He said, Jackson, I can't give you that permission. That's above my pay grade. You're going to have to go to division headquarters. So I go up to 8th Infantry Division headquarters in Bad Kreuznach. I pull into the general's parking lot. There's an Austin Healey there. Somebody's a car guy. So I go into the commanding general, private first class, just walking in cold into the commanding general's office. There's a major sitting there, What the hell do you want, Private? I said, well, sir, I was told I had to come up here and get the general's permission to run my 1935 BMW in the Le Mans retrospective race. You what? Let me get the general. Guess who the car guy was? Commanding General of the 8th Division. He's the one that owned the Austin Healey in the parking lot. He'd already seen my car. He came rushing out of his office, and I explained the whole thing to him. And he said, of course you can, Private Jackson, but you damn well better tell him you're in the 8th Infantry Division. Yes, sir. So in 1958, I got to run the Le Mans retrospective race in Le Mans, France, and was the first American to ever run in that race. And the president of the American Le Mans, they have a club over here of Le Mans enthusiasts. And tomorrow afternoon, the president of that club is coming to see me and wants to write a story on it. The story, I've got a copy of the story they did in Stars and Stripes on the racing is there on the table. But yeah, that's another whole world for me. I could go on. I was rookie with some guy named Roger Penske. Roger and I traded pate in an airport race up in Dunkirk, New York. I was driving a 57 Morgan British sports car, white, and he was driving a black 66 56 Corvette. And we both dove for a turn at the same time, and we bumped. And after the race, we got together in the pits, and I got him to autograph my black paint smear. But he was an engineering student at Lehigh at that time when I was at Penn State, and he remembers it interestingly because one of my photographers at the Sun met him at Pocono and said, I'm going to see him again at the Fall Pocono. And I said, you ask him if he remembers. And he said Roger was sitting there in a chair, and all of a sudden he started to grin and shook his head, yes. But like I say, I could regale you for hours with racing stories.
Thank you both so much. I just have a few closing remarks. I think we've had our questions. I think everybody got their questions answered, so let's close it up.
No, thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. So obviously, Bill is very familiar with our coffee mugs, so now he has one for his collection. And I just have a few, I'll try to keep it brief here, but thanks so much for being here, those of online and those of you in person. Next month we have Russell Baumgartner, World War II veteran. I've actually known him personally for years. He used to hunt on his land and stuff with my brothers and me, and real nice guy. He used to come to our meetings, but he hasn't come for a little while, but he's going to be speaking for us next month, Merchant Marine guy. But Bill, I want to thank you first and foremost tonight for your military service and also for your founding our group here. He's, along with your friend, you co-founded the group and our group, and we're our first president for, I don't know, 8 years or so, right? Kirk said 11 years? You were 11? 8 years or 11 you were president? Okay. But yeah, for a good amount of time. And okay, so you did a wonderful job. And here at the end here, please come up front and see Bill's table. He brought a lot of really special mementos that he explained most of them, but not all of them, what's up there. But you'll see the rest. And come up and shake his hand and say hi to him. Now, before we close, a special thank you for Cliff and Laura Pasquello tonight. Thank you. And they were, Cliff and Laura have been helping the Roundtable ever since it started alongside Bill and some other select people who started from the beginning. And you know, I came along many years later, but I honor and respect the work that Cliff and Laura have done for our group over the years in many different capacities, not just audiovisual, but our press and our press releases and our emails and a lot more. And just being part of our group for so long, we really want to thank you. We wish you the best in your journeys in North Carolina and your new endeavors. And thank you so much for being here tonight. So I guess we're going to close tonight. Please come up front and say hi to Bill then. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Good night. Thank you so much.